destroyed us on the football field. And it was a typical November football game, 34 degrees and raining, sleeting, snowing, that kind of thing. My wife from Arizona had never really been in weather like that for an extended period of time. Like, you mean you're really going to sit in a game? We stopped up in Spokane and got all great Columbia gear. We came down here, we had hot chocolates, and we just bundled up, and it just poured on us. And she said it was one of the greatest times of her life. I think she became a Coug that night because she just thought, who does this? So now when they have the Cougar games down around, we have a really local alumni association down there, and there's a bar called the Tilted Kilt in Scottsdale that's owned by Coug. And I bet you we get between 40 to 70, 80 sometimes Cougs in the valley that go and watch those games. And she's always like, are we going to the game tonight? She went to UT Austin, so she's become a bit of a Coug. And then I was back here one other time, sleepy summer of 2003. Our son came up here for the football camp. And it was, I don't know, was it June maybe? So the campus was completely dead and got into some of the buildings, not all of them. But this is the first time since '84 I've had a chance to get back here. And it's just awesome to be working with all of you today. So really looking forward to this. A couple more minutes and we'll dive in. But I got to ask while we're waiting, how many of you feel like you're good storytellers? Show of hands. Good. Confident. Yeah, sir. I do a workshop at Social Media Marketing World in San Diego. By the way, if you've not been to Social Media Marketing World, it's well worth going. It's 3 days of just the best minds from around the world in social. And they have about 3,500 attendees this year. And I do a workshop, a storytelling workshop, 90 minutes, and I had a room of 500 people. And I asked that room if, how many of there felt they were good storytellers, and I bet you not even 10% of the hands went up. Which is kind of phenomenal if you think about it, especially if you're in communication. You are paid professional storyteller. So what happens to our storytelling? How come we don't embrace it and run with it? So that's what we're going to cover today. I have so much to cover, I figured I'll just start covering it before we actually start. Any questions before we start? Yes?
You mentioned social media marketing
Social Media Marketing World.
World. Where's that at?
It's in San Diego at the convention center right there. They hold it the same place every year.
Okay.
And it's not inexpensive, but it's well worth the investment. And I always recommend if you're going to go in a day early, get yourself settled in. There's all kinds of great professionals running around there, so you can start doing a lot of networking. And then they've got 3 days of just intense, massive social media training going on, and really a fantastic place to network. All right, we're going to... Well, let's just kick this off, shall we? Good morning again. Thanks for having me here. This is just so much fun. I've always read about the Moreau Symposium from afar, but I've never been here. So when I got the invite to come about 6 months ago, I was like really pumped. I go, right on. This would be cool to get back to the old alma mater. I think my mom was even more proud than I was. So yeah, that was kind of cool. So here's what I want to do. We're going to talk about brand and storytelling as a brand superpower. Today, I want this session to be about you and your individual personal brand, especially for you graduating, moving out in the world. I hate to tell you, you are just a commodity. You're a number unless you can really identify what your story is and why you do what you do and how that makes you stand out. And I guarantee you, every single one of you has this innate superpower in you, and you're probably not using it to its fullest. At least that's been my experience. So today, we're going to see if we can't unearth that in your own story. This is meant to be a very interactive session at any time. Please ask me if you've got any questions about this. And what I would like to do, start with someone right next to you. I want you to look, and if you're going to have to find somebody, me. Well, we might have some extra ones that are coming in. I want you to turn to your partner there. You have 1 minute to tell them what it is you do. What is your personal brand? What is your story? In 1 minute, and then you turn and your partner is going to tell you what their story is. What makes you different? What makes you special? What makes you stand out in your your profession? You ready? Let's begin. Oh, good. All right, time to switch. Other person tell their story. What's your story? Do you not have anyone? All right, tell me quickly, what's your story? Okay, good. So I want you to hold on to that story. You've got a moment in there that you were just talking about right now where you said you went to school and then you took some time off. So I want you to think about that moment because I think that there's going to be a story in there that you will be able to use to really build on your professional experiences because you're just ultimately trying to find what your personality is and the humanity that you bring to the job. Yeah. All right. So hold on to that. Let's see how that develops. Okay. And it might be kind of hard to go through because it's sometimes those hard times on us we don't like to talk about. But when you own them, you can really find great power in them. All right. Good. All right. Okay. How'd you all do? Was it hard? Did you nail it? Who nailed it? She nailed it. Okay, tell us her story. Stand up.
Oh, no.
She just nailed it. Yeah, come on. You're in the communications world for crying out. Of course you will. Turn around. What's your story?
So we were just talking about bridging the gap, and we're both science communication majors. And especially in a time like today when 97% of scientists, believe in climate change, and there's still a problem. Being able to bridge the gap is especially key today between scientists and the general public. So,
okay.
And I guess that's both of our story. Yeah, in a nutshell.
Excellent. I got a book for you. You've got, let's hear it for him. A good friend of mine, Harvard PhD evolutionary biologist. Before you write him off, he also went to USC Film School, graduated, did 3 documentaries on climate change. He's written 3 books, and his real mission now is to help scientists do a better job of communicating and storytelling. He's got a phenomenal book called Houston, We Have a Narrative, Why Science Needs Story. Put it on your list. And read it. It's just, he covers it from a biology side as well as a science side. So how can we get these smart, big thinkers to actually connect with us? Great story. Did you find it hard? I mean, when you only got 1 minute and you're not prepared for it to turn and look at someone right in the eye and tell them what it is you do and why that makes you special? Yeah, it's like nearly impossible. So what we're going to do today is talk about this. There's this trend I just saw come out in a blog post last week. On LinkedIn in 2011, nobody had storyteller in their description. Now, over 500,000, 570,000 people on LinkedIn call themselves some sort of storyteller. My challenge with this is a lot of people get up and go on and on about the importance of story, and you got to tell stories, but nobody ever shows you how to do it. I know because I had to go and dig it up myself, and that's why I'm going to show you today what I learned on how you can be an intentional storyteller with a system that literally has been around since the beginning of time. I did not invent this. All I did is mapped it to business and found out that it worked really, really well. So I've captured it in this book, and what I like to do in these things, if you are tweeting and taking pictures and whatever and pushing out, here's my handle. Of course, you got to have the Symposium 43 on it. We want to give, this all the props possible. Put a story on, that's my particular hashtag. And what I do after all these sessions is I'll go and I'll find the 3 most interesting, fun, vocal participants pushing this information out, and I'll send you a free workbook that you can use then for your own personal brand. And once you're done with it, you can use it for your client's brand, company brand, if you go into that kind of work. Also, I think while you're there, you should probably throw a Go Cougs on there, just for fun. But let me tell you about this wonderful woman I know who's going to turn 93 on April 5th, in like 10 days. She grew up in Wenatchee, Washington, and when she was just 4 years old, she was in the waiting room of the Wenatchee Hospital. She was waiting for the arrival of her sister, Diane. And she told me, she goes, I was kind of creeped out, it was cold, my mom and dad were in some other room, and I was just sitting there by myself. And then this nurse walks in, just shows up like kind of out of nowhere. She looked at her, and she's in her all nurse whites. She said it kind of was like this guardian angel. She sat down and she talked to Pat, and she kind of calmed her down. And she reached into her pocket and she pulled out an orange. Gave her an orange. And just sat there. This lady just goes, wow, this is, amazing. This complete stranger shows up, gives me this orange and walks off. Her sister then arrives and everything's cool. Well, that moment led to Pat becoming a nurse. It was after World War II. She studied. She was over in Hawaii. She was a nurse for a while, and then she met her husband, Keith, and they got married at age 29, which was kind of old in their generation. So to make up for lost time, she had 7 kids in 9 years. Yeah, cranking them out. And if you ever wonder if God has a sense of humor, he put her in charge of starting the sex ed program at her kids' school, St. Brendan's in Bothell, Washington. Yeah, exactly. Beautiful. She had it coming. She ought to know. She was a nurse. Yeah, so it was awesome. So after her brood grew up and left, she went on and she volunteered as a nurse for 3 decades, till her mid-80s, at Overlake Hospital. And then most recently, she's been tending to her husband of 65 years, who's been battling Alzheimer's for the last 6 years. So an amazing woman that's been at it for 70 years, and just think of all of the people that she touched in the process. And I asked her why, what was it? And she told me about that moment of that nurse, a complete stranger, simply giving her an orange. And what that underscored to me is while we're all so busy looking for these big epic stories of love and loss to define who we are and what we did and where we've been and where we're going, it literally always comes down to the moments, the scenes in our lives that shape who we are today. So I want you to be thinking about that. While we're talking about storytelling, think about the scenes or the moments. And here's how I learned this. So graduated from here in 1984, been in advertising and brand marketing for like 35 years. Ran my own agency in Phoenix, Arizona. 2006, when technology was really starting to take off and before the recession hit, we realized that advertising, as we knew it, the paradigm was shifting. It wasn't working anymore. And I couldn't figure out why, but what I did know is technology totally changed the playing field, as you all well know. Where the masses used to own the influence of mass media, now the masses became the media, and they own the story. And you know how hard it is to cut through the noise, the cacophony of communication that's created out there, rise above it and be heard, especially on your terms. So I had to go and look to figure out, what do we do? How do we actually use this new digital technology, these channels, and how do we get our people to stand out? And what I learned and what I found is that an anecdote is literally the antidote, because we are simply hardwired as human beings to create meaning out of the madness of being live. I learned this from our middle son, Parker. Here he is hamming it up for the camera. He went to film school in Chapman University in Orange, and he's been in Hollywood ever since. And in fact, he is just about ready to launch Red Bull's very first virtual reality music video. He directed it, produced it. He's put the final touches on it. It'll be out in a couple weeks. So very, very proud of him, because he's followed in the old man's footsteps. But I never had the guts to go to Hollywood, and he's been having a great time. While he was going to school, I said, Park, I want you to send me your textbooks. It was between 2006, 2010 that we were going through this big upheaval with technology. And I said, since I'm paying for them, send them to me when you're done. Because I want to know what they're teaching you, number one. And what could I learn? What's happening in Hollywood? And what I did find out and really started studying was Joseph Campbell. Are you familiar with Joseph Campbell? America's foremost mythologist. It's okay if you're not. Most people don't. I didn't really know that much about him until I started studying him. He created the hero's journey, this universal framework. He didn't create it. He recognized it. He called it out, and he showed that it has been around since the beginning of time. And all you got to do is pull up Star Wars, the very first one, print this off of Google, go through it, and you will see the hero's journey play out in front of you. Well, I started studying that, and I was noticing how other screenwriters were using it in different ways. And I'm going, oh my God, there's actually a pattern and a framework to storytelling. Hollywood's been using it forever. Writers have been using it forever. Why don't we in advertising and marketing do it? And I think the answer to that is we just think we're innate at it and we're good at it. We don't have to think about it. We get lucky when we do it right. And I thought, well, what if we got really intentional about it? What would happen? So I did a lot more research, and I read a terrific book called The Storytelling Animal, How Stories Make Us Human by Jonathan Gottschall. Highly recommend adding it to your list. He says in it, our brains, our human minds yield helplessly to the suction of story. When you think about it, story's probably been the most powerful evolutionary tool we have from being cavemen to consumers. It's probably more important than opposable thumbs, just purely for our survival. So this is not something new. This is just what we've always been doing. We just haven't been doing it very intentionally. Now, science has done a really interesting job as of late trying to figure out how story works in our brains, and it still doesn't know completely. But what it does tell, and by the way, I love this, in 1897 phrenology drawing, what do? To try to explain the different parts of the brain, they create little scenes, little stories. It's how we learn. Well, they've learned that when they do functional brain scans, and they see that our brain lights up in different areas when we hear a great story, thinking that we're actually participating in that story. The blood tests show that we release, 5 neurotransmitters, serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, cortisol, and endorphins, to take us on highs and lows, to give us optimism, to create focus in our lives so that we're there as an active participant of that story. In fact, Ira Glass thank you, fame, very good. You get a sticker. This American Life thing, he gets 1.7 million listeners every single week to his stories. And he says an anecdote has a momentum all its own. Even if the facts around a story are kind of boring, if you wrap it in a well-told story, it makes it feel like you are on a train and it has a destination and you're going somewhere. That is how powerful storytelling is. But our challenge is, in this day and age, is everyone's screaming at you and imploring you to tell your story. But a lot of us don't, because we don't think that they're of the Ira Glass scale. They think they maybe don't measure up, and so we withhold them. And that's why I argue, stop looking for your story and start finding your scenes, those moments that have uniquely impact who you are as a person and as a professional. You start stringing those scenes together. Your story will absolutely materialize before your eyes, and when you go in to interview for that next big job, you're already going to have your resume, you're going to have all your credentials down. That's just simply the cost for entry. Put way more attention into your cover letter to tell your story, because your character will trump your credentials every single time. For example, 2 weeks ago, I was in Phoenix, and we were working with this company out of New York called Silverline, CRM. They were doing their annual corporate retreat out there, and I had the benefit of working with them, 60 of their top leaders, for a half-day storytelling session. And this young lady volunteered to step up. She was quite mild-mannered, a soft voice, Angela Crow. She was a Ukrainian immigrant, and she stood up in front of the room to tell people her story. And she said, you know what? I'm a manager here that creates alliances and partnerships, and I'm really good at what I do, and it's really important for Silverline CRM, and that's why I just love being here. So when I pushed her, and I said, can you take us a little bit deeper into this story? Because we kind of get a sense of what you do, but I really want to know why. Can you take us to a moment in your life that you knew that this was a superpower of yours? she kind of pushed back. I could tell she didn't really want to share it. So we wrapped up. I didn't push it anymore because I thought maybe she was uncomfortable in front of her colleagues, or maybe it was a sad moment in her life. She just didn't want to share it in public. After we were done, she came up to me and she said, Park, I didn't tell you my whole story. I go, yeah, I know you didn't, Angela. How come? She goes, well, since I've been in America, I've been told that American business people don't want to hear about my hard times in the orphanage. And I go, orphanage? You grew up in a Ukrainian orphanage? She goes, yeah, from birth till she was 18. She said it was really hard. She was picked on, even abused. And she said till one morning when she woke up, and she said, I can't remember if I was 8 or 9, but I remember waking up and thought, I'm only going to survive this if I surround myself with kids I can trust and with adults that not only cared for me, but actually cared about me. And I said, oh my God, you've been actually building alliances and partnerships ever since you were a little girl just to survive. She goes, that's right, and that's why I'm so good at it today, because I know the importance of them. I said, well, what'd you do after that? She goes, well, I was lucky I got to come to America. She went to the University of Georgia, got 2 degrees, then went to Georgia State and got a master's in international business. And now she's working in alliance and partnerships for this high-tech company in New York. Hell of a story. Started from that moment in a Ukrainian orphanage, and I told her, I said, Angela, you have to own that story, and you absolutely have to tell it, because it really signifies who you are, and it demonstrates what your superpower is to the world and how you help other people. And she was like, okay, thanks. And I didn't think I really had her quite yet. So I said, and you know how you use that story? I said, the next time you are sitting across from a customer, prospective customer, all you have to do is look them in the eye, give them a little bit of your story, and then say, have you ever felt orphaned by your vendor? Felt abandoned? Felt lost? They didn't do what they say they're going to do? I promise you that will never happen with me. How powerful would that be? Because she found her moment, and plus several moments after that, to create her unique story. Now, the metaphor and all this that I love the most is I asked her, I said, Angela, can I share this story when I'm up here? She looked at me and she said, absolutely. And then I said, can you send me a headshot that I could use? She goes, well, you'll just have to use my little 200 by 200 from LinkedIn because that's all I've got. And I said, Angela, you have to live in a high-dimension life now. So she's going to go and get a big-time photo so that she can really tell her story out there. But here's the deal. When you start looking for your story, you know, the universe is going to push back. It always does in every great story. You think about the protagonist. They go for something, and then they get tested. So the universe tests your character, your mettle. How badly do you really want it? And it's got this platform today that is more vocal now than ever, social media. So think about every time you share something and you get this wonderful little like. Well, that is simply the opioid pusher of the web, releasing all those neurotransmitters that get you addicted to sharing only your smiling faces, only your best meals, only your greatest vacations. And what that does, it starts masking who you and who we really are. Then what happens? We get FOMO, the fear of missing out. We become, you know, these fawning voyeurs to other people's grand adventures, or so we think. But then we make the greatest mistake of all, and that's when we start comparing our own personal narratives to others. And we start thinking that ours are simple and small and stupid, while these other people are all living these great, you know, fictional adventures, basically epics. And you get the big sad face when this happens because it derails everything. In our brains, it literally gets you telling yourself the wrong story, and everybody's, you know, up against this. What happens when you are not living into your own story is you start losing confidence because you're trying to measure up to what other people expect of you. Or you don't play to your strengths. You think about it as you're trying to measure up to other folks, and you are not who you are, and you're not using your superpower. And finally, it just is hard, because as we are trying to live into these other stories, we're toiling and we're losing time to make the impact in the world that we all could be making. Now, I can tell you because I lived through this myself. I had a wake-up call on Monday, September 14th, 2015. I mean, I know exactly the moment this went down. The universe showed up and said, you know, it's time for you to make a change. Now, understand, up to this point, I'd been in the advertising business for over 30 years. I ran my own ad agency for 20 of those years. Still running it down in Phoenix. And I built it from a little shack in the back of the very first home we owned We grew it. We added employees. We added building. And I built a company, I thought, that really defined who I was. And don't get me wrong, it was fun at first, but then it started losing its allure as I started realizing I wasn't really living into my best story. But I was building a career that I thought my mom and dad would be proud of, that my peers would respect, and even my siblings would appreciate. I was kind of doing it for all the wrong reasons. So what it said is, it's time to move, and that's what I had to do. We were working in story. We were working with clients all around the country, and we were having a lot of success with it, but we weren't doing the advertising like we were doing before. It was really about story development. Arizona State University came calling, and they saw some of the cool stuff we were doing with story and asked if I'd write a curriculum, which I did. I'd never done that before. Wrote it 5 years ago, and I've been teaching executive masters for sustainability leadership communications to international execs over the last 5 years. And so here's the universe still saying, so dude, why are you toiling with this ad agency over here? I got completely other design for you. So that morning I said, I'm going to shut it down. I'm going to make a pivot at 55, middle-age crisis. Good thing I have a wife that's like, yeah, go for it, man, that's cool. I think probably from sitting through that USC football game. She knows the determination and grit of a Coug. So what I did is I went on, and now I simply coach, teach, and speak about storytelling literally around the world. And I work with leaders. I still do brand story development, and I work with folks like you, do these kinds of workshops. And it's the most fun I've ever had. It's taken a while to really get traction, but now it's booming. So I am standing here in front of you saying, when you are living into someone else's stories, you're not making the impact you absolutely can be. So you've got to embrace your own story. What I knew at the time, but then I had to learn for myself, is compelling storytelling is always about the moments, because the moments define our experiences. It's what we individually get to experience. It's what is uniquely our own scenes. Those experiences define our beliefs, because you believe in what you experience. And the beliefs then shape our truths. You unwrap those truths now about you that nobody can refute, and you find your superpower. And then you find ways to express your superpower. You don't have to be this guy. Metaphor for powerful superpowers. But this is what I want you to do today. Start thinking about these scenes that define who you are, that separate you from every single other person in this room, on this campus, in this world. Because you all are special and can deliver in your own unique way. But here is the absolute toughest part of the story scene thing. Hollywood calls it the dark night of the soul. I prefer belly of the whale. I know someone who might call it Ukrainian orphanage. Because it's in the moments of struggle, when you are tested the most, is where you're going to find the pivotal scenes that actually propel your story forward. Now, don't get me wrong, there are good times in there too that do this, but it's often when the universe wakes you up and says you're heading in the wrong direction. This is not what we have intended for you. Case in point, there was a young boy, 9 years old. His name's James, and he's in a kitchen with his aunt. She's drinking tea, and he is fascinated by this boiling tea kettle on the stove, so much so that he pulls a chair up, and he's sitting there, and he gets a spoon, and he holds it over the spout. The steam's coming out, catches the condensation under it. He watches as the water drips down the handle. He's just blown away by this phenomenon. Well, what's his aunt do? She's kind of pissed. She thinks he's being lazy. So he turns to James and says, James, get down from there. Read a book. Do something productive. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? Have you ever had anyone say that to you because they just completely misunderstood what you were about? Well, imagine how James felt. But lucky for us, he was undaunted, because 20 years later in 1765, James Watt invented a new kind of steam engine that ushered in the Industrial Revolution. So a marvelous journey sparked from a moment with a teapot. Now, what talk would be complete without, when you're talking about marvelous journeys, without bringing up Steve Jobs? I mean, the guy had pretty much of an iconic odyssey, wouldn't you say? But his started in little tiny moments, too. Did you know that when he went to Reed College, he was fascinated with calligraphy, and he took a calligraphy class. And his friends and his parents were like, Steve, what are you doing? Why are you wasting your time and money messing around with calligraphy? Well, what did it lead to? It led to his fascination and his understanding of how to create the graphical user interface that completely revolutionized our computing world. So again, a revolution, it begins in moments of discovery and moments of inspiration. And even if you're not out to change the entire world, that's fine. That's totally cool. Your marvelous journey is found in your moments, in your scenes. So stop looking for the big epic stories. Start finding your scenes to piece those together, and they're going to happen. And what happens when you do, you're going to clarify your own personal story, your origin story, so people have a way better understanding of who you are, what you're about, where you're coming from, and where you're going, starting with you. Second thing it does, it amplifies your impact, because as you are sharing your real-world experiences, your audience live vicariously through you. You ignite those same neurotransmitters. You light up their brains in the same way. And what this does is now they have understanding and empathy for who you are, and you get to share your shared beliefs and values with them. So they start saying, oh, she's just like me. He's just like me. How can I help? And then finally, when you do this, you get to simplify your life. So you simply get to be you on your own terms. So what we're going to do for the rest of this presentation is have you find and think about a moment in your life, and we're going to create a story around it. Now, where might you find those? Here's just some examples. You find them wherever you like, but think about maybe a time when you were little and your curiosity got the best of you, and you followed a path and learned something that inspired you and completely changed your trajectory, because you learned something you had no idea. Or think about a time when a seemingly insignificant moment had a surprising impact on you, changed everything. You just didn't see it coming. Or a time of triumph when you overcame something you thought you couldn't. You just had no idea you could overcome that. In these kinds of moments, or think about maybe that enlightened calligraphy moment of your own, or your own inspired teapot moment. Or what about, have you had an episode of being lost and abandoned? And how did you overcome that? Finally, like my mom, Nurse Howell, do you have that inspirational orange moment that inspired your complete purpose in this world? They are such diehard cougars. We now have my dad's in memory care in Bothell, and he will go nowhere without his cougar jacket on. They've had 5 kids go through here, graduate, and 7 grandkids, with the 8th here right now as a sophomore. Diehard cougars. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to take you through what we created that I've been teaching. I call it the applied science and bewitchery of story. And we're going to use it on you. What I want you to do is when you leave here today, come away with at least one origin story about you. What makes you uniquely you? Find a moment in time that it starts from, and then we're going to start building on it. I'm going to take you through the 10 steps of the story cycle. You all have a book here, right? And we have some extra ones. So I want you to scribble in these. I want you to write them up. And then if you want a clean one to leave with, there'll be plenty around here to take. But I want you to have these books in hand. And I'm going to walk you through the 10 steps of the story. And we're going to take each step. You're going to have 1 minute to write and just start capturing your thoughts or the content around that particular chapter of your story. Any questions before we dive in? So have you thought about a moment? Do each of you have maybe a moment that you could start with in your life that, like, wow, that really kind of changed everything for me and has shaped who I am today? All right. And if you don't worry about it. Just start writing about your past story, your back, and where you're going, and you're going to see that these things are going to start getting unearthed. The deal is, these moments are often buried under the detritus of life, of everything else we've been through. So you got to be kind of like an archaeologist and dig them up. Or they are caught in some sorrowful, sad times, so we tend to push those out of our heads. When you bring them back in and embrace them, you find that they can be really powerful. Or they're also buried underneath the piles of scripts that other people think you ought to be living into that aren't uniquely your own. So this is where you're going to find these crazy moments. So let's start with chapter 1. This, by the way, the 10-step story cycle system is all completely inspired by Joseph Campbell in his 17 steps of the hero's journey. And we use it for everything from high-level brand story strategy, and we helped with companies grow by as much as 400% using this, right down to leadership development and folks that use it for themselves and for their teams. You can use this same pattern for any kind of story that you are creating. So let's start. Chapter 1, where in the world have you been? capture the scene. Just set the stage for us. If this is a specific moment, tell us, is this your Ukrainian orphanage moment? Set the scene for us in that stage, the beginning of this, so that we have a jumping off point for the rest of your story. Quite often you can just answer the question, where have I been, where am I going, or where am I now, where am I going? So I'm going to give you 1 minute. We even have a soundtrack for you to write to, because, I mean, you're now scripting, screenwriting your own story. Here we go. All right, we'll move on to chapter 2. Who's your hero? Now, in this case, you are the center of the story. And let me caution you, this is the only time you get to be the center of the story. Because when you get out there in the work world and you're representing clients or working for folks, you play an actually more important role of mentor or guide, which we'll talk about in a minute. But for today, for this, we want to learn something about you. So tell us, 1 or 2 of your strengths in this particular journey, and then tell us a weakness, that Achilles heel, something that you always have to fight, an internal demon or whatever that might be, that you have to overcome to be successful in your tour, in your journey. And let me give you a little secret here. People are way more interested in your foible than what you're good at. Right? She's nodding over here. Yep. And why is that, do you think? It's not like they're being mean.
No, it's because if you're making yourself vulnerable, they can relate to you better.
And let's take it even one step deeper. Now I get Dr. Randy Olson to thank for this, the evolutionary biologist. Why do we want them to relate to us?
To help build relationships, and it also helps us influence them.
Because we're social beings, and we're social beings for even one step deeper, purely survival. It goes back from the days of us strolling the savannah. Our brains have not changed appreciably, especially our limbic system. So we want to connect and be social with people for our survival, but more importantly, I want to know what you have to overcome so that I can learn in case I have to do the same thing. Maybe I have the same problem or I have a similar problem, and I learn from you and your storytelling how you have overcome this. And I go, oh, I can use that for survival. It basically comes down to story is that primal. So in this next chapter, tell us 1 or 2 things that you're pretty darn good at, your superpower, and then one thing that you always are fighting to overcome. Okay. Funny thing just happened to me right there, the caveman, the storytelling ape in me. I'm sitting here as you guys are doing that, and I see someone walk by with a big WSU logo on a backpack, and my head just goes like this because you don't see them in Phoenix that often. And so when you do, you always go like this, and I caught myself thinking, oh, well, yeah, I'm on campus. That makes sense. The social animals we are. All right, let's go on to chapter 3. What's at stake? What's at stake in your journey? You know, this is something you probably have already experienced, so let us know what, you are going through at this time and what it is you're really striving for, and maybe how this moment helped propel you in this direction. The higher the stakes, the more interesting your story. And it can be external stakes of, getting that new car and having that great job and whatever, or it's internal stakes of having to overcome something. And quite often those internal stakes are even more important. So tell us what's at stake in your story. Okay, you know what really gets your story going now? We're just really still kind of setting the scene. It's the call to adventure, or as Hollywood calls it, the inciting incident. What was the inciting incident in The Wizard of Oz that got that story going? Tornado. How about the first Star Wars? When Luke came back and found his aunt and uncle were killed on Tatooine, what happened? He left his ordinary world and was immediately pushed into Mos Eisley in that crazy bar, and now he was on his grand adventure. So what is the call to adventure that you either did or are currently responding to? Something changed in your life in this moment. And it might even be in hindsight when you think about this. But this is when you make that decision. I made the decision of closing down my agency 2 years ago and doing this. That is a pretty inciting incident, call to adventure, and going for it. So what happened in your life with that? And by the way, you have no guarantees of success, by the way, on this mission, but you got enough gumption that you're going to go for it. Take us to that moment. Take us to what happened. Okay, now we're moving into Act 2. We've been setting the stage and been, saying, what is it you're after? What are you about? What are the stakes? What has set this story in motion? Now we want to up the ante a little bit more and talk about the villains, fog, and crevasses, the obstacles and antagonists that are totally in your way. This is when I mentioned earlier where the universe likes to punch you in the nose and push back just to test your character. So what obstacles does it put in your way? And I like to use the theatrical villains, fog, and crevasses. Villains, what competition? What is competing for your attention and your energy? It can be literally an individual, an organization, another brand that you're headed up against, or it could be time, resources, things that are competing for your attention. The other villains that you've got to pay very close attention to is that inner voice, that fear. What is it telling you? Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. How do you have to overcome that villain? Fog. What are your blind spots in this pursuit? What is it you don't know that you don't know, but you have enough gumption once again to go after it because you're hoping it's going to reveal itself? And then finally, the crevasses. What gaps do you have to overcome to make this a reality in your life? So share with us, up the stakes, up the ante, and take us to the obstacles and antagonists that you are totally against in this, your journey. Going by fast. Now we move into chapter 6. Enter the mentor. Who was there to help you get through? Who was there that you got coached by, taught? Your Obi-Wan Kenobi or Yoda or your Glenda Good Witch of the North. Who is a mentor that helped you get through this? And this is important because none of us ever achieve anything of any significance by ourselves. We just simply don't. There's always at least one person there that's helped guiding us through. So introduce them here. And I want you to pay particularly close attention to this chapter because from here on out, you become this person for your company you're going to work for the clients you're going to represent, for the audiences that you will be presenting to and talking about. You become their mentor or guide. You are no longer the center of the story, but today you get to be the center of the story. We want to know who helped you through. Now we move in the road of trials. Remember earlier in this presentation when I talked about the toughest part of storytelling and finding your scenes is what Hollywood calls the dark night of the soul. I preferred the belly of the whale or Ukrainian orphanage. So take us on your journey that you have been on or are currently on and take us to your dark nights of the soul. A time when you were going for this and through those obstacles and antagonists, the universe pushed back, punched you in the nose, tested you just to see how badly you really wanted it. Tell us what that looks like in your journey. By the way, the worse it looks, the better your story. So, here we go. moving right along. When's the last time you got to write to a soundtrack? Huh? Isn't that fun? All right, so you've taken us to the darkest hour, and you've overcome. What does that victory look like? What physically happened? And it doesn't have to be some grand, epic, win. It's that small little victory that we get that tells us we're on the right path. And it's maybe going to get even harder as we go, but you're on the right path. So tell us what that moment looked like to you, that moment of victory. And we move into our last two chapters found in Act 3. What does this all mean? And because we're storytelling animals, we only tell stories because we're trying to make meaning out of the madness of being alive. We're just trying to figure out what is this person trying to get across to me by telling me their story. So this is what I had mentioned earlier, too, about how storytelling amplifies your impact when you share your real-world experiences with others, that they get to experience what you experienced, and it connects your shared beliefs and values, which is the most critical thing to do if you are going to connect with your audience. So tell us the moral of your story. Now, this could be implied by what happens. It could be about perseverance, stick-to-itiveness, risk-taking. I don't know what it is. But you are now going to be looking at the story that you've written down, and you're going to realize, oh my goodness, here is a belief and value that this story communicates about me. It's by far the most powerful way to communicate anything about yourself is through telling a story versus just coming up and saying, I'm a hard worker. I'm a team player. I like people. That stuff means nothing. Tell stories that demonstrate that. So what does your story demonstrate about you? And finally, chapter 10, to be continued. In the branding world, we call brand ritual. How do you get people to buy into your story, to actually make your story their story? By connecting, by saying, yeah, I've experienced something just like that, or, oh my God, how'd you overcome that? I want to know. So in your story, what's your call to action to your audience? What do you want them to do with this knowledge now about you, and by the way, about the universe in general? Because it's not just about you. What you experience is what most people experience in one way, shape, or form. So connect with them. How do you hand your story to them, make it their own, and what is it that you want them to do with this information? All right, how'd that work for you? Who would like to come up and share their story? Come on up. All right. And your name?
Preston.
Preston. Good to meet you. I love the hat.
Thank you.
Here you go. You own it. Now, one thing, Preston, is because we live in this world of hyper, lack of attention span and everything else, you have exactly 3 minutes. We got a timer on it. 3
Excellent.
minutes to deliver.
And I'm long-winded. Perfect.
Excellent. You start whenever you like.
All right. So growing up, I was very isolated, like a lot of people probably. Bitter, angry kid that was like, people are dumb. I don't like people. And I grew out of that, meeting people with engaging people, people who reached out to me, kind of kicked me in the butt, and were like, you're important, you matter. And as a result, I kind of ended up being the opposite. Like, I'd probably never talk in this situation. I love it. Me, as a person now, as I've grown, like to listen to people. I like to lift people up from places of weakness. It is something that I aspire to do. But I like to talk a lot, and sometimes I can definitely get in my own way as a point of, this is super intimidating. I don't know if I can do it, but I will. There's weakness at stake, though. I do want to be taken seriously when talking to people, when engaging with people and trying to help people out of places of suffering. And I also want to help myself. If we help each other, we help ourselves pull out from places of incredible pain in those depths that we don't like to talk about, our orphanages, but they're still there and they still exist. One day, I realized, just kind of out of nowhere, that, and actually observing, I was not the only person suffering in this world. Kind of everybody else around us does too, and realized that, I don't have to suffer alone. There are people around that maybe if I reach out, it can make a difference. It can help people. And I really started wanting to help people out. However, I am my own worst enemy, and there's also this dualism of the bratty little kid that was bitter and hated people still comes up and is still back there. It's like, why would you help them? And it's like, because everyone's great at their core. Even though we all have that kind of bitterness inside of us, we also have an other side that is excellent. So I'm fighting this kind of dualism, instinctive dislike of people, and yet the fact that everyone's awesome at the same time, and kind of this back and forth. There was a guy I met a long time ago, kind of my transition into adulthood. His name is Drew. Very phenomenal, outgoing, kind of outdid me, which is amazing. I kind of steal a lot of things from him. And he helped me out of my old mentality of like, people are bad, and was like, sure, they can be, but also, by the way, everyone can be good. And if you help people, and if you reach out and you stick out your time and you say, I am willing to devote my time and my life to you, it can make a radical difference, and you can see people absolutely changed. And I took that to heart and kind of lived by it. So I came here, and I was confused by a good many people. I've talked to so many people, and I've seen so many problems. University for people all around the world, problems I've never encountered or experienced in my life, trying to help people. But it was super overwhelming, but with some hard work and meeting other people, it helped out. I found other people who had my same goals and interests here, able to team up and organize them, and we were able to help a lot of people out of very deep and dark problems. Ultimately, the moral, no one can heal and thrive on their own, and together through friendship and engaging, we can help each other out of even the biggest holes of darkness and helplessness. And community is the avenue to prosperity.
There you go. Now, before you sat down, wasn't that great? Another round for Preston. Awesome. Well done. So you did this perfectly, and I'll pay you later. You started high level, so we got a good background on you, and then you introduced someone that came in and kind of helped you maybe see another way of doing things. And what are you studying right now?
Journalism.
Journalism. What do you want to do with that?
Go into new media and kind of explore different ways of storytelling, using technology to the advantage instead of this kind of half-poisoned social media we have to kind of be like, what is the way that, kind of to my point, how do we help people with the technology we have to reach people in a way that's meaningful?
Okay, so you've got this dichotomy of not liking people, but then realizing that, I could actually help people, and you've got a social media platform that you realize can be completely inane and not helpful at all, but if used well, you can actually elevate people up.
Absolutely.
Now, in this role, what kind of employer would you be looking for? Who do you think you would be doing that for?
either people, perhaps in advertising, marketing, or something bigger that are exploring with the medium. A lot of people, even entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, people that are like, I want to invest, go out on a limb and invest and see what we can do. Really, people like to experiment with technology, different ways of interacting and dealing with people.
To what end?
To the end of helping as many people as we can kind of connect and communicate, like the whole goal of building community instead of our segmented kind of tribalism.
Excellent. So with Preston's story, out of everything we've just learned in this very short amount of time, if you were to sum it up with one word, one theme that would be like the North Star for who he is through what he just shared in that story, what would that word be? Yes. Community. Yes. Resilience. Yes. Compassion, which is interesting because he admittedly has zero compassion, but he's grown into it, right? Oh, and you're not alone. I think, there's the two sides to every coin. There's very compassionate, and then there's that dark archetype that says, yeah, not so compassionate. To me, and by the way, those are all correct answers. There's no right or wrong here. But what I hear coming back again and again is connection. Connecting. He was disconnected, and then he realized he's not the only one running around the world disaffected, and he goes, oh, actually, if I can connect, I can maybe help them. So you go to the most uber platform of social media, the anti-connection platform. It's ironic that we are more connected now than ever, yet there's records amounts of alienation and loneliness because people aren't actually connected, that you are looking to find a problem, to solve a problem. Or how can you overcome that? Because it's not going away, right? Yeah. So from your own background, your own backstory, you might be just the perfect person with the right superpower to help people understand how to connect those two worlds.
God willing.
God willing. God willing. So that's what I mean by now we know a lot more about Preston than we did before because he took us to a backstory about who he is. And what I would say in that now is start teasing out the different stories. I want to know about the guy that really made a difference. And literally the instant, the moment that you walked away and you had an aha and you go, oh, I've been looking at it all wrong. If I do it this way, I can actually help people. Find 3 of those moments in that entire story and then write it together and start sharing it with your friends and your family and see how it evolves and see how it not only defines you and gets you more clear on your direction, but how people now will totally understand what Preston's brand's about. And it's okay if it changes too, by the way. When you get in and really start exploring this story, it's not always going to be the story you thought it was going to be. You're going to go, wait, actually my truth is over here. So be open to that too, but play off of those events, those moments in your life. Look for the scenes that have shaped who you are today, and you're going to find your story. Thank you, Preston.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate that. We have one more. Time for one more. Anyone else like to get up? Or we can just open it up for Q&A, because I see we're right about at the 10:15 mark. Yes? You want to come up? Awesome. Your name? Kevin Gonzalez?
Yeah.
Kevin, nice to meet you. Come on, let's hear it for Kevin.
I'm probably not going to be as good as this guy just saying. All right, so my story begins watching a Mariners game and hearing Dave Niehaus, as I believe it was Brett Boone, hits a grand slam, yelling, "It's grand salami time." I don't know why, but for some reason as a kid, that was just the most amazing thing to me. And for that, it got me really into telling a story because he was able to tell the story of the Mariners game really well. And I'm going to mess up with this book. And for me, I've always had a skill as a talker. That skill is also kind of my hindrance. I've always rather talked to people than listened to people. And I realized through him that listening is actually more beneficial than telling people my own story, because by listening to him, I'm able to figure out more, and it actually helps me learn more about myself. And so through my talking was actually my way of getting to know people and not be lonely. For me, as a little kid, I was always with my brother, but he's also like 5 years older than me. So as soon as he became a teenager, it wasn't cool to be with me anymore. He just wanted to be away from me. So I turned my storytelling I learned from Dave Niehaus and reading books to instead tell my own story to people, get to connect with people, and not be lonely anymore. But through that, I've also went away from sports instead of watching sports and learning about more stories. I was more focused on being with people. So I went away from storytelling in general and just wanted to be popular. Then I went with my mentor was my 8th grade teacher, Miss Murphy. She forced me to read a book in one of my classes. She said that I couldn't just sit during reading time and do nothing and play on my phone. So she forced me to read stories again, and I read the story Percy Jackson. It became my favorite story of all time. I love it. I've read it maybe 5 times. That story to me is so perfect in so many different ways. And because of that, it got me to read more books. I read that series. I read the sequel series. Because of that, I read more and more books. And I realized that I wanted to write and tell stories in the same way. So I started writing my own books, very terrible books. I realized that writing books was not my thing. My friends told me that I'm good at storytelling, but I'm a terrible writer. So that in mind, I ended up taking a lot of writing classes, a lot of communications classes. I realized while my writing isn't that great, my talking ability actually is something that a lot of people like about me. I'm able to communicate myself rather well in most situations, probably not here, but I learned that talking was my best skill. And from that, I took a radio broadcasting class in high school, something that not a lot of people get to do in high school. And I got to tell a story on the radio. It was one of the coolest experiences ever. And because of that, I best to go with the book again. I found that I love telling the journey of people. I loved telling the journey of sports and non-stories. And because of that, I've gone into journalism. I decided to come here because, it's a pretty darn good journalism program. And found that my moral of my story is through experiences in your life, no matter your destination, you'll get to the outcome you want.
Thank you, Kevin. Excellent. And I love how you had friends say, actually tell you a story you're not a good writer, and you're like, well, screw that. I'm going to go become a good writer. Now he's a journalism major. That's awesome. I love the persistence of that. Thank you. Let's hear it one more time. So wrap up here. What I've learned is this story cycle based off of the hero's journey works because it simply mirrors life. It mirrors what we already go through. So why don't we collect and connect and build our stories using the same type of process? When you get really good at it, by the way, think of these as content buckets, and you can tell your story backwards. You can mix it up all you want. You don't have to follow this formula, but it does work every single time. Presentations for anything. So use it, look at it. I'm for you at businessofstory.com. I have a ton of tools there for you. I do a weekly podcast. I've got working up on 150 episodes of story artists from around the world. My whole goal of it is to teach communicators just like you how you can be using story day in and day out for every form of communication. And I'd like to leave you with to always remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thank you. All right. Thank you. And I'm here for the next 2 days if you want to track me down and chat. So.